You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to learn more about the Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com, where we have past podcasts, blogs, and a couple items for sale. So check us out, beardedtheologians.com. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this week's show.
You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So this week on the podcast, as we were kicking around ideas, we thought we'd start the new year right with the lectionary, like we always do.
let's phrase that better. Let's start year 8 off,
yes,
like we usually do with the lectionary.
Hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The good thing is a 3-year lectionary cycle with 4 verses.
That's right.
We still have a lot of lectionary texts to work through.
We got about 12 more years to go. Buckle in.
So we're going to dive into the Hebrew Bible today, which is somewhere where we don't dive into all too often, unless it's Psalms or Proverbs.
True.
We're going to look at 1 Samuel 3, 1 through 10. Zach, do your thing.
I do. I'm going to read it to you. So wherever you are, once you hear these words. Now the boy Samuel was serving the Lord under Eli. The Lord's word was rare at the time, and visions weren't widely known. One day, Eli, whose eyes had grown so weak he was unable to see, was lying down in his room. God's lamp hadn't gone out yet, and Samuel was lying down in the Lord's temple, where God's chest was. The Ark of the Covenant, right? I don't know. That was just a weird phrasing of that sentence. Sorry. The Lord called Samuel, and he said, "I'm here," he said. Samuel hurried to Eli and said, "I'm here. You called me." "I didn't call you," Eli replied. "Go lie down." So he did. Again, the Lord called Samuel. So Samuel got up, went to Eli, and said, "I'm here. You called me?" "I didn't call you, my son," Eli replied. "Go lie down." Now Samuel didn't yet know the Lord, and the Lord's word hadn't yet been revealed to him. A third time, the Lord called Samuel. He got up, he went to Eli, and said, "I'm here. You called me?" Then Eli realized it was the Lord who was calling the boy. So Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down. If he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down where he had been. And then the Lord came and stood there, calling just before Samuel, or just as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, your servant is listening." Matt, that's a classic scripture for us pastor types that I would imagine most of us point to at some point in our call story or life for a variety of reasons. But why? What hits you? What hits your attention in the Samuel passage?
I'm not gonna lie. What really struck me was when Eli replied, "Go lay down."
Go back to bed.
I looked up the message, and it just says, "Go back to bed." I didn't call you. Go back to bed. So he did. I don't know. I just to me, we think about this in the context of listening. Are we listening to God?
Mm-hmm.
And the question we could wrestle with is, and it brought this up, like verse 7. No, Samuel didn't know the Lord, and the Lord's word hadn't yet been revealed to him. So, I think until we know what that looks like, it's hard to recognize how God is working in our lives. The Methodists have a great term for that called prevenient grace. The work of God before we recognize it. And obviously in Samuel's life, God was working, whether he realized it or not. And I don't know, it's like the whole part of go lie down, just because it happened 3 or 4 times. I think of it like a little kid, how many times you and I play Xbox pretty much every night. And how many times do any one of us say, "Go to bed"?
Go to bed.
Please go to bed. I don't know.
Right.
I think that's what got me is just the idea of Samuel's willingness to listen.
Mm-hmm.
Especially at the end, the way the Common English reads, Samuel said, "Speak, your servant is listening."
Mm.
Eugene Peterson translates that as Samuel answered, "Speak, I am your servant, ready to listen."
Yeah.
And I think as we talk about and think about the beginning of the new year, now granted, we're 12 days in. Um, the real question is, as we're planning our years or we're thinking about what we're wanting to accomplish or wanting to do, asking ourselves, how much does God play a part in our planning for that?
Mhm.
I think that's kind of where I am today.
Nice. Well, and I love this story, and I guess it hit me this morning. I know Samuel's story. I know, but I always forget of this part of it. Like I remember this story in particular, but I always forget the how Samuel gets here. Samuel's mom Hannah is unable to have kids. Her husband Elkanah has children with the other lady, and Hannah's the first wife and is super sad. Is found crying in the temple by the priest Eli, and he thinks she's drunk. Kind of rhymes with Pentecost a little bit, but she's like, "No, I'm sad. I'm crying. I want a child." And Eli prays for her, give this woman a boy. And, her vow is simply to give her son back to the temple, back to God. And when she has Samuel, that's what she does. She takes him back to the temple. Eli raises him in the temple to be a priest, right? And we hear the beginnings of that story here, very much in kind of a father-son story. Samuel hearing something, getting up, going to Eli, and like, what do you want? I heard you. I'm here. And Eli going, dude, go back to bed, please. Go to sleep. Yeah, I find that very, very humorous. But I really, uh, I think that says and shows so much about the relationship that Eli and Samuel have. Samuel's not just a baby or a child that a woman brought to the doorstep as a promise, and keeping her promise, but Eli raises Samuel. They have this relationship that goes far beyond a priest and a congregation member, a priest and another person. Um, Clearly, they're very close, and they have this deep-seated relationship. And yet, even in these moments, Samuel doesn't know who God is. And I find that really, really interesting that this person, this young child that was given to back to the temple to be a servant of God is still learning, is leaning into who he's called to be. And clearly by that response of, I'm here. I'm here. You called me. I'm here. And then, like you said, that last little bit, yeah, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. Such a, I don't know, it's just such a beautiful story, and I think we all have these moments, whether we're called to full-time ministry as ordained ministers, or if we're just simply called to our community to make a difference, right? We all have these moments where we hear God calling, we hear and see the movement of the Holy Spirit, and we're saying, I'm here, send me, let's go. And I don't know. I think whoever you are, wherever you are, and whatever you're called to do, we have these moments of, here I am, send me, let's go. And I love that. I love that for the new year as we lean into new year, new you, and resolutions, and healthy practices, and trying to make 2024 typically better than what 2023 was. And really, this just reminds me to take a beat and listen, to hear where God's calling us to go this year.
Yeah, and I think there's one of the other things too is like you see that Eli so Eli realized that it was the Lord calling the boy. And
Hmm.
so what Eli did was say, "Hey, go back to bed." If he calls again, say, "Your servant is listening."
Hmm.
And so what he does here is he's doing a great way of teaching faith.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I think I've come to recognize and to acknowledge is how um, much of a struggle that can be for parents in teaching our faith, because it adds a sense of level of vulnerability that we may not be willing to have. with our children, because we that's just something that's been a struggle. I think I see, and I would bet you could attest that we don't do a good enough job of sharing how to interact with our faith in unique ways, and recognizing when the Spirit or God's at work. I think that that's something we could do a better job of. That's something I'm trying to figure out. How can I do that as my kids are transitioning slowly to adults? I mean, Laura graduates in 2 years and Emily's 4 years out. And, have I prepared them enough in the faith? I think that's something to wrestle with, because that is part of our responsibility as parents to help bring them along. And Eli does a great job of saying, like, if you recognize this again, here's what you should do. I really think in the subtext that you don't see here, be ready.
Yeah, right.
And that's what I always tell my congregations is, like, when you see the words "don't be afraid," be ready.
It really means be ready. Or anytime Jesus says, "Look here."
Yeah.
Listen.
The kingdom of heaven is like.
Right. No, and I think there's such a significant example of pastoral care here, of not Eli giving Samuel the answer. So, dude, it's God calling you. Go and listen. Right. It's just that simple invitation. If you hear it again, go listen. Here's what you say. And I think far too often as spiritual leaders, as pastors, when we're doing pastoral care or we're preaching, whatever it is that we do, we've talked a lot about it on this podcast. Of we fall into that rut of having to have all the answers, or feeling like we have to speak to all of the things, and if we don't, we're failing and whatever. And yet Eli gives a great example of make some space, create space to listen. As a leader, as a priest, as a pastor, we don't have to have the answer. Eli knows if he finally catches on of what's happening, but he doesn't give Samuel the answer. He just simply says, go back and listen. And if you hear it again, here's some advice, right? And I don't know that we always do that so well as pastors, to encourage people to take a beat, to make space to listen, or for ourselves to even do that and just take a beat and not have to have the right words or the perfect words, but just to say, gosh, if that happens again, take a moment, listen, make yourself present, and see what happens.
Well, I think it's because and this is something that you and I have experienced last couple, especially at the last orders meeting, talking about making space for testimony. And that's something that has gone away in the church, at least in mainline churches, not so much in some evangelical circles. But there is some power in testimony of people sharing how God is at work in their lives, and that can spark something way more than a sermon ever can. And so I think that that's something, like, I know I've been wrestling with it, and I've been kicking around ideas with you about what I would like to do, because I do like that. Like, I think there's something powerful to that. And so I think that, ask yourself, like, how do you create that space in your community? Like, I was teaching a Bible study during Lent, or Advent, already in Lent, getting ready for Lent. Yeah. And it was amazing to hear in the last week how many people, like, we had this, like, serious, vulnerable conversation. Now, granted, like, it was Matt Rawl kind of kicked it off. He came on and talked to us for about 15 minutes, and then, but the vulnerability that came out of that conversation was like, man, this is what church should be like. People sharing where they see God at work, or how God has affected them, or maybe even when God felt distant, and or when they're angry or upset with God, like. And it was just so powerful. That's like, man, I got to figure out how to do this more. I think that's, we have to get better at teaching the faith. Like, it's more than in just sermons. It's more than in just Sunday mornings. It's in all of our spaces, like asking that question, where do you see God at work today? Like, I think that's just a great place to begin.
But that's the problem with that question. I love that question. I love asking it. It's not a Sunday morning question.
No.
Right. And I ask it in Sunday mornings often, right? But when you're doing it there, it's not a question because there's no time for response. There's no time to sit and be present with that and listen to each other. And that's why things outside of Sunday morning worship, whether it be Sunday school or Bible studies or midweek stuff or bar church or, just hanging out with your family or friends unrelated to church and walking through those questions with each other is so, so vital to who we are as a faith community. Because otherwise, if we're not having the conversation about where God is at work in our lives, we're not sharing our faith. We're not being witnesses to our faith, right? If we just hold all of that in, and who cares? Who cares if we're not willing to share where we've seen God at work? Who cares?
So, Zach, I'm going to ask you this question. In the last couple of weeks, where have you seen God present in your life?
I don't really want to answer this question. That's so hard. No, it is hard, but it's not because over the last couple of weeks, really since Christmas Eve, I don't rest well. Like I don't take days off well. I don't vacation well. It's just not. It's a personality defect for me. But from the moment that I left the church on Christmas Eve at 10:30 that night to like the third day of January, I didn't come to the office. I stayed home. I hung out with my family. It was great. And I saw all of the, I just saw so much of where God was at work in that and just getting some rest and being refreshed and excited about coming back into the office. But more importantly, excited about connecting with my family and just being present with them, which it had been a minute and not just Advent. It had just been a minute. We've been busy as a family and I've been busy at work. And it was a beautiful chance just to rest and honestly see where God it was at work in my family and is at work in my family and just how we connected and reconnected and are enjoying life together again. Matthew, where do you see God at work?
So, I have an issue in my neck, and so one of the things that I'm preparing for as I'm getting ready to see a specialist will be physical therapy, and it's helping me strengthen some muscles, but then also helping relieve the pain and tension. And it reminded me that something I needed to pick up while I was here because I brought it here and I left it here and it needs to be at home. But and I know listeners listening can't see it, but I have this like nice TheraBand. And if you've ever been in physical therapy, you know what TheraBands are. They're the like red bands that smell like rubber bands and can like really do some damage if you let go of them when you stretch them very far. But they help strengthen muscles. And I have lived off of these for like the last 25 years of my life, being in and out of physical therapy for all different things. But it's reminded me of how we have to continue to work on our faith, work on those muscles, whether it's sharing our faith or studying the faith or being attentive to listening to God's voice, and working those muscles so we can create stronger muscle memory, so we can be active in our faith. And to me, that's where like seeing that has reminded me of like the work that it is always required of what not only just what I do professionally, but my spiritual self as well. And so I've taken up a few new spiritual things to kind of keep me grounded a little bit better for a while, just for a while till Lent. And so that's kind of where I've seen God working in this world today.
Until Lent, where you give them all up.
Yeah, and then I do nothing.
And then nothing. Which is great. Naps for Lent are a wonderful thing.
According to Bible, according to the scripture today, I need to be taking more naps to listen to God. So
I think that's such a valuable thing for all of us to make that space for ourselves, for others, to have that intentional time to listen and not always have to say the things. And so thank you. Thank you for asking the question and then making space to answer.
Maybe that's something we include this year in the podcast to help grow spiritually, to help craft others to flex that muscle, but also to help us too. Because
Mhm.
how often do we get that space to do it
Mhm.
in a non-sermon type way?
Right. Or in a safe space, right? Yeah.
So, all right. So, for those listening this year, we want to encourage you to take a nap. You could actually just put this podcast on and hit like play. You could definitely get some good naps in.
Get a good 15-minute nap.
We want to encourage you to continue listening. You can. We just started year number 8.
Yeah, we did.
Year Ocho. Can we call this year Ocho just for
The
fun?
Ocho. Bearded
Ocho.
Theologians, the Ocho.
Yes. And so, encourage you to go to our website at beardedtheologians.com, where you can see all 8 years of really good, really subpar, and some not so great podcast that we have. And so feel free to do that at beardedtheologians.com. So for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
Guys, I want you to subscribe and like this video and push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.